As a woman who's just broken into tech, these are the advices I wish I had when I was starting. Pick a language, any language. In other words, just start. Stick with the chosen language until you're reasonably grounded in it, and use this chosen language of yours to learn the basics of programming. You can always switch later, and the knowledge is transferable between the different languages. Tip number 2, LearnOOP. This refers to object-oriented programming, a programming methodology based on 4 main principles of encapsulation, abstraction, polymorphism, and inheritance. I will link to a video that has a very good overview of this and is pretty beginner-friendly in my opinion. OOP uses classes and objects, and it's very popular. Many programming languages are either OOP natively or have adapted a lot of OOP features, including Java, which is, in my opinion, a very solid language to learn. Tip number 3, learn data structures and algorithms. Use the chosen language to learn data structures and algorithms. I'm not saying you should be an expert in data structures and algorithms. I'm not saying you should spend hours practicing algorithms and data structures. I am just saying understand the data structures available to you in your language and a bit of algorithms to start with, because this will make things so much easier and they'll make things make sense faster. You know those aha moments you have usually when you're learning? They will come faster and closer together as you go on, if you understand the basic data structures, because these are the building blocks of your language. Tip number 4, learn version control. Use version control while you're learning. Git and GitHub is popular and widely used, and you should use these tools from the beginning. Like even if you're just learning HTML or CSS or a CSS framework or a JavaScript framework or some backend technology, whatever it is you're learning, use version control to manage these little projects and these little lessons of yours. Learn the most common vocabulary used around version control, which is pushing, pulling, managing branches, merging, rebasing, and all of that. Learn this as you practice your code. This will prepare you for team environments should you get a job. And even if you don't get a job, or you're not planning to get a job and you just want to start a venture to be a freelancer, should you have a massive project that requires for you to go out and get help, or even for your own, or should you have many projects, version control will just help you manage your own projects. It doesn't even have to be in a team environment. Its usefulness is not just tied to a team environment. So yeah, I would advise you learn version control. You learn it from the start, you understand the basics, and you go ahead with this. Tip number 5 is to practice, and to practice some more, because practice makes perfect. So like even if the chosen language you've picked doesn't make sense, keep going. And I'd like to iterate something here. Pick, as I mentioned before, you pick a language to start with. I mean the language itself. So for example, if you decide you want to learn Python programming, understand Python itself. Don't start with Flask or Django or Fast API or some other framework. Just start with Python itself. So when you understand Python really well, picking up a Python framework becomes very simple and very easy to do, and you can easily switch between the frameworks because they're all based on Python. So that the Python ecosystem makes much more sense when you understand that the underlying block of it all, the base of this is just a Python language. Win yourself off tutorials. Get to a point where you can take a project idea, plan it out, and develop it on your own. I do not mean that you shouldn't ask for help. I do not mean that you should be able to take an idea from your head and make it a reality without meeting deadblocks, without maybe checking on Stack Overflow or asking a mentor or a senior for help, or going back to your tutorials to find out how this particular thing is done. That's fine, but you should not be in such a place where you need to follow a structured tutorial, a very detailed step-by-step type of tutorial. For every single project idea you have to look for a super detailed tutorial, because a blank screen scares you. You shall get to the point where the combination of a blank screen and an idea in your head, and a coding project idea in your head, does not scare you, so that you're able to work backwards from your goal and break this big project of yours into smaller pieces that make up the big project. This is a skill that is useful not just in programming and in development. It's useful in life in general, so that it reduces the feeling of overwhelm, and a blank screen in the context of programming and development does not seem so scary, because you're able to plan out the UI, the user flows, and the processes as relates to your application and your idea. And a bonus tip, perhaps we all want to have really big, fancy, complicated projects on our portfolios if your goal is to look for a job or to get some traction on the freelance side of things. This is perfectly okay. But after you have like 2 or 3 such projects, I would suggest when you take a project, you use each, like take mini projects, and each mini project should have a particular goal. Let's say I want to learn a CSS framework using this project. Then I won't be too concerned about the back end of the project or how it's structured or even the logic of it. I just want to learn the CSS framework. Or I want to learn, let's say I want to learn Firebase. Then I'm just interested in understanding Firebase. I do not need to care too much about the front, so I can use a theme, or I can just make it super basic and boring on the front, because that's not my focus area. I believe that this is a very powerful way of learning, and that if you do many of this, a lot of these mini projects, all of this stuff will start to click in your mind. And when you find yourself in maybe a job setting or a project that's already ongoing, you'll be able to make the connection between the different pieces. Like you need not have been there from the start for it to make sense. So like your project, you say I'm just focusing on the back end, and it's super strange. For me anyway, it was super strange to focus, say, on just the front end and not the back end. I always saw the project as a whole from the beginning to the end. But when you're dealing with really large, super complicated projects, this might not necessarily be the best way, necessarily be the best mindset to come to, because you will need to see the entire project in order for you to make sense. Otherwise you will feel overwhelmed. So I think taking mini projects and using the mini projects, focus on specific things, is just like the best way to go. So those are my advices, and if you found this video useful to you and you like such kind of content where I'll be sharing tips, advices, and tutorials, sharing what I learn essentially with you guys, and taking your feedback and having a back and forth, developing a small community of ourselves where we encourage each other along the journey. We help each other. Then feel free to like and share and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one.